We do begin tonight with what forecasters are now warning will be a potentially catastrophic, crippling winter storm.
Look at that. Holy. Look at G-Doc over there. Oh.
Whoa!
Bye-bye.
Something is happening across America that feels fundamentally out of order. A severe winter surge settled over Texas and Oklahoma, forcing rapid adaptation where little preparation existed. Along the western edge in California, coastlines and inland valleys began adjusting quietly as land use patterns were reassessed under long-term pressure. Far to the north, the sky above Alaska shifted into vivid gradient color, an aurora display long associated with powerful phenomena. And in Missouri, the ground itself responded from below, releasing pressure without storms or rain to explain it. These events are distant, but their timing is not. When elements and climate react together, coincidence becomes harder to claim. The question now is not what we are seeing, but what is beginning to surface beneath it all. Before we continue, like this video, subscribe, and stay with us. A severe winter surge settled over Texas and Oklahoma, regions accustomed to brief cold snaps, not sustained freezes. Temperatures dropped fast. Wind cut through open plains. In towns where winter gear is often minimal, the cold pressed in with unfamiliar persistence. What once felt rare has begun to feel recurring, another chapter in a pattern residents are learning to recognize. Scientists point to shifts in atmospheric circulation and jet stream behavior. Technically, there are logical reasons. But for many residents living through this period, the experience is far more unsettling than the explanations suggest. The cold arrived suddenly, spreading and disrupting daily life in unprepared areas. Power systems were overloaded, traffic slowed, and communities were forced to adapt without warning. Families had to adapt, improvising warmth in homes not designed for prolonged cold. One detail stood out everywhere. People weren't only protecting themselves, they brought animals inside. Dogs and cats slept in hallways and bathrooms near heaters. Livestock were moved closer to barns. Space heaters were moved from room to room, not just for children and elders, but for dogs, cats, and animals. Many described not as property, but as family. Ranchers wrapped water lines to keep troughs from freezing. Neighbors checked on each other's animals as much as on each other. And in the quiet hours before dawn, you could see it lights on in barns, garages cracked open for warmth, and blankets laid out for creatures that couldn't ask for help. The cold arrived too quickly for comfort, forcing compassion into action. It disrupted routines, but it also revealed priorities. Warmth became a shared responsibility. This response echoes a theme deeply rooted in the Old Testament. Scripture does not separate human hardship from the care of animals. The righteous care for the needs of their animals. Proverbs 12:10. In biblical thought, compassion toward creation is not optional. It is a measure of righteousness itself. When conditions turn harsh, how people treat the voiceless becomes a spiritual indicator. In the Bible, seasons of widespread upheaval are often framed as moments meant to awaken awareness rather than provoke panic. When conditions once considered rare begin to repeat themselves, and when the boundaries defining climate and geography begin to blur, the message becomes impossible to ignore. The Bible speaks repeatedly of seasons in which nature itself reacts, when patterns shift to remind humanity that control is limited and certainty can vanish without warning. This cold wave matters not just for how low temperatures fell, but for how broadly they spread, reaching places unprepared, at moments unanticipated, affecting millions at once. When familiar climates behave unpredictably, the question moves beyond forecasts. Why now? And why so many places together? As assumptions about stability give way, many are left wondering whether these events are simply weather repeating or part of a larger season that asks for attention before it passes. Following days of intense winter weather, an unfamiliar glow settled over Alaska, turning a routine polar night into something quietly unsettling. Residents across coastal towns and interior valleys stepped outside, expecting darkness, and instead found the sky layered with shifting color. Bands of light stretched from horizon to horizon, not only pink and violet, but vivid green, that pulsed and drifted like a living curtain above the snow. For many longtime Alaskans, the sight stirred memory as much as wonder. Elders recalled other nights when similar colors appeared often around periods of powerful space activity, when news later spoke of solar storms or geomagnetic disturbances rattling Earth's magnetic field. Those past displays, they said, were beautiful, but they rarely came alone. Then the colors changed again, and the green grew brighter. Scientists offered a grounded explanation. This was aurora activity, charged particles from the sun streaming along Earth's magnetic lines and colliding with gases high in the atmosphere. Oxygen interactions produce green light. Nitrogen can add reds and purples. When solar wind intensifies during geomagnetic storms, the aurora expands, brightens, and becomes visible far beyond its usual limits. Instruments confirmed elevated space weather conditions that night, aligning with reports of increased solar activity. What made this display stand out was not just its presence, but its breadth and persistence. The light did not flicker briefly or stay confined to the northern rim of the sky. It spread wide and lingered, reshaping the landscape below. Snowfields reflected green. Mountains took on unfamiliar shadows. Drivers slowed not because of the road, but because the sky itself felt altered. Even with scientific clarity, many witnesses described a deeper reaction. The aurora was stunning, yes, but it also carried weight. People spoke of stillness, of a sense that something larger was passing overhead. The beauty did not erase unease, it sharpened attention. As one resident put it, "You don't forget a night like that. It feels like the sky is reminding you it's alive." The Bible often frames lights in the heavens as signals tied to transition, not destruction. He wraps himself in light, as with a garment. Psalm 104:2 speaks of illumination as presence, while the heavens declare the glory of God. Psalm 19:1 points to the sky as a messenger rather than a menace. These passages do not deny natural mechanisms. They insist that meaning can coexist with them. So, the question lingers beneath the glow. When the sky itself changed color in the midst of a storm, are we only observing physics at work? Or are we being invited, once again, to look up and pay attention before the moment passes? In Alaska, the lights eventually faded. The snow remained. The cold returned to normal. But for those who stood beneath that colorful sky, something else stayed behind, the sense that not every sign arrives with sound, and not every warning comes with force. Before we move on, please give us a like and subscribe to support us. Every contribution helps. Thanks so much. As atmospheric disturbances drew attention inland, the western edge of the United States was undergoing a quieter, slower transformation. One measured not in headlines, but in shoreline lines that no longer held their place. Along the California coast, the change did not arrive as sudden destruction. It arrived as steady adjustment. Seasonal storms and persistent swells pressed against cliffs and beaches, subtly accelerating erosion and reshaping contours that had appeared stable for decades. In many areas, land did not collapse outright, it repositioned. Coastal bluffs shed thin layers. Beaches narrowed. Tidal zones crept inland by meters rather than miles. The transformation was gradual enough to be missed day to day, yet cumulative enough to alter entire stretches of coastline over time. What once felt permanent began to feel provisional. And beneath that quiet shift, something else was happening, not dramatic, but deeply consequential. Across low-lying coastal plains and interior valleys, historically tied to agricultural abundance, water managers have been reassessing land use where conditions are no longer reliable. In parts of the western San Joaquin Valley, reduced water availability has already led to sections of farmland being set aside, not because production has failed suddenly, but because sustainability over decades can no longer be assumed. These areas, once dependent on stable sediment, groundwater recharge, and predictable runoff, are now understood as vulnerable under prolonged stress. At the same time, a notable shift in approach is emerging. A regional water management authority in the western San Joaquin Valley has outlined a long-term plan to repurpose some of this fallowed land for solar energy generation, paired with grid-scale storage and transmission infrastructure. Rather than attempting to force productivity from land that lacks water security, the plan treats these areas as assets for energy resilience, spaces where sunlight, not irrigation, becomes the primary resource. This contrast is striking. While certain agricultural zones are being re-evaluated, offshore oil and gas operations continue under established patterns, proceeding beyond the coastline in waters that, on the surface, appear stable enough to support them. Inland, adaptation is beginning through planning rather than reaction. Researchers point to a convergence of natural factors: persistent wave action, incremental sea level rise, saturated soils, and slow subsidence beneath coastal shelves. None of these forces are new on their own. What is new is their alignment. Together, they create a long-term pressure that does not announce itself through catastrophe, but through rebalancing. Land gives a little at a time. From a geological perspective, this is not collapse, but exposure. The coast is revealing where margins were always narrow and where stability depended on conditions that no longer hold consistently. Protective structures can delay change, but they cannot reverse the underlying shift. Once sediment supply and ground elevation begin to drift apart, the Old Testament often frames such moments not as punishment, but as instruction. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it. Psalm 24:1 speaks to stewardship rather than ownership, while he sets boundaries for the seas. Job 38:10 reminds readers that limits exist, but they are not immovable by human design alone. When boundaries change, the lesson is not panic, but attention. What makes this moment significant is not visible damage, but imbalance. Productive land narrows, while offshore activity remains steady. The shoreline adjusts, while deeper systems continue unchanged. Nature is not collapsing, it is reordering. So the question that emerges is not only geological. When fertile ground slowly gives way and established patterns no longer align, are these shifts simply part of a natural cycle? Or are they signals, quiet ones, that call for closer observation before the margins grow thinner still? During a powerful storm system sweeping across the plains, observers documented a rare atmospheric alignment. Two tornadoes forming side by side, rotating in near symmetry for several moments. While multiple funnels can occasionally appear within the same storm cell, meteorologists note that this kind of parallel structure mirrored motion, matched speed, and sustained proximity is highly uncommon. The funnels did not surge unpredictably or diverge rapidly. Instead, they tracked forward together, as if governed by the same internal rhythm rather than competing forces. What drew further attention was not destruction, but order. The surrounding storm environment remained active, yet contained. Rain bands wrapped evenly. Wind fields held consistent direction. Even debris signatures on radar appeared restrained. The scene suggested not escalation, but coordination, an atmosphere expressing balance under extreme conditions rather than collapse. And then, cutting through the wind, came a sound that did not belong. Multiple instruments recorded a deep, resonant tone emerging beneath the storm, longer and steadier than thunder, lacking the sharp crack or rolling decay typical of lightning. The sound carried across open land and low cloud cover, described as metallic and trumpet-like in character. Unlike ordinary storm noise, it did not fluctuate with gusts. It persisted briefly, then faded without transition. The detail that unsettled analysts most was consistency. Independent microphones, weather stations, security cameras, and field recorders captured the same tonal signature across separated locations. This ruled out local interference, mechanical vibration, or electrical malfunction. Spectral analysis showed the frequency did not align cleanly with known atmospheric acoustics, aircraft, or ground-based sources. It was not loud in volume, but it was distinct in form. From a scientific perspective, storms can produce infrasound, resonance, and pressure-driven acoustics under rare configurations. Yet even specialists acknowledged that this combination synchronized rotation, paired with sustained tonal output, does not fit neatly into established models. The atmosphere appeared not chaotic, but expressive. In Scripture, such moments are not framed as random. The Old Testament repeatedly associates trumpet-like sounds with transitions rather than destruction. Blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Joel 2:1 describes not panic, but awakening a call to attention before change unfolds. Likewise, God has gone up with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. Psalm 47:5 links sound with movement and authority, not fear. What makes this event linger is not mystery alone, but contrast. Storms are expected to display force. They are not expected to display symmetry or voice. When the atmosphere presents both visible alignment and audible signal, it challenges the assumption that nature only reacts blindly. Nothing collapsed. No boundary failed. Yet, something communicated. And when nature produces both form and sound without escalation, without damage, the question shifts. Not what was destroyed, but what was being marked. Not how strong was the storm, but why did it feel intentional? Some signs are violent, others are restrained, and history suggests that the quiet, structured ones are often the hardest to ignore once they are truly heard. As storms moved overhead and subtle shifts were recorded in the land, an unexpected pattern emerged quietly beneath otherwise undisturbed inland waters. At a calm freshwater lake in Illinois, observers documented an unusual alignment among aquatic life. Fish were seen arranging themselves vertically, forming a narrow, rising column that extended from deeper water toward the surface. This was not a loose school spreading outward, nor a brief reaction to surface disturbance. The formation held together, moving slowly as a single structure, maintaining its shape longer than typical schooling behavior allows. What added credibility to the observation was the follow-up measurement. Sonar scans taken across the lake showed a dense, upright concentration of biomass, stacked through multiple depth layers, rather than dispersed along a horizontal plane. The column appeared to intersect the lake's thermocline, a zone where temperature and density usually discourage vertical movement. Yet the fish remained aligned across it. as if responding to a cue stronger than normal environmental boundaries. And still, nothing else changed. Water clarity remained stable. Dissolved oxygen levels stayed within seasonal norms. There were no sudden temperature spikes, no algal blooms, no chemical signals, and no predator activity detected in the surrounding area. Wind conditions were light. The surface remained largely undisturbed. From every measurable standpoint, the lake behaved as it should, except for the life within it. Biologists note that fish are among the earliest responders to subtle pressure changes, low-frequency vibrations, and shifts that instruments often register only after the fact. Their nervous systems detect variations in water movement and density that humans cannot feel. Yet in this case, there was no obvious stressor driving flight or defense. The behavior suggested alignment, not panic coordination rather than escape. This distinction matters. In nature, panic scatters. Alignment concentrates. Scripture often describes water and its creatures as responsive to commands and pressures unseen by human eyes. The waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you and were afraid. The depths trembled. Psalm 77-16. Elsewhere, creation is portrayed as attentive rather than chaotic, moving in response to signals that originate beyond ordinary perception. Let the sea resound, and all that is in it. Psalm 98-7 frames the waters not as passive matter, but as participants. What unsettles about the Illinois Formation is not danger or damage, but order without explanation. When living systems organize themselves precisely, without visible cause, it suggests sensitivity to something real, even if unmeasured. The lake did not churn. No boundary failed. And that leaves a quiet, persistent question. If creation can respond to pressures humans cannot yet detect, what might it be sensing now before the rest of the world catches up? As living systems below the surface settled into unusual order, attention shifted inland toward stone that had remained undisturbed for centuries. In the arid interior of Arizona, a routine land survey revealed something out of place. A carved stone structure bearing Hebrew characters partially embedded beneath compacted desert soil. Analysis of tool marks and weathering patterns suggested significant age, consistent with early 1st-century stonework techniques rather than modern carving. The inscriptions were not ornamental. They followed linguistic spacing and alignment typical of ritual or memorial use, raising immediate questions about how such an object arrived and remained preserved in the Southwest's dry terrain. What followed shifted the focus from historical curiosity to something more difficult to categorize. Without any visible external force, the stone began to exhibit subtle motion. The surrounding ground remained firm. There was no wind strong enough to move heavy material, no equipment operating nearby, and no subsurface activity detected in the area. Yet the stone itself showed a faint, repeating vibration, steady enough to be observed over several minutes. Nothing else responded. Nearby soil did not shift. Loose sediment remained undisturbed. Instruments placed on adjacent rock registered no sympathetic movement. Seismic readings remained flat, showing no tremor, no pressure wave, and no resonance typical of natural fault activity. The motion appeared confined to the stone alone, isolated within an otherwise still environment. Closer examination revealed a detail that deepened the unease. The vibration was not erratic or abrupt. It followed a slow, regular cadence, more like a pulse than a shake. The stone did not scrape against the ground or rock back and forth. It rose and settled by fractions, repeating with a consistency that suggested rhythm rather than instability. In geological terms, the movement did not resemble fracture, stress release, or erosion. It resembled response. In the Old Testament, stone is not merely material, it is testimony. Altars are built as witnesses. Boundaries are marked with rock because of its permanence. And yet, Scripture also records moments when what is fixed becomes expressive. The stones will cry out, Habakkuk 2:11, is not framed as metaphor alone, but as consequence when injustice or warning can no longer remain silent. Likewise, I will shake the heavens and the earth. Haggai 2-6 speaks not only of nations, but of foundations themselves responding when appointed times arrive. The significance of this moment lies not in damage or spectacle, but in contradiction. Stone is defined by stillness. Its value is endurance. When such an object exhibits motion without measurable cause, it challenges the assumption that meaning belongs only to living systems. It suggests that witness is not limited to breath or voice. The desert did not crack. No collapse followed. Yet something ancient registered movement, quietly and precisely, amid a wider pattern of restrained but deliberate signs. If stone chosen for permanence can respond without force, then the question is not what moved it, but why now? And in a season already marked by alignment across land, water, life, and sky, that timing may be the most significant detail of all. As stone showed signs of response, something long concealed beneath the ground came quietly into view. During a routine geological survey in the southwestern United States, instruments identified a subsurface void that did not match natural formations common to the region. Beneath compacted sediment and layered rock lay a sealed chamber, its dimensions clean and deliberate. The walls bore evidence of intentional shaping rather than erosion, with flat surfaces and right angles uncommon in natural cavities. The chamber had remained stable, dry, and undisturbed, suggesting it was designed to endure long-term burial in an arid environment where temperature and moisture remain relatively constant. Inside, investigators found a series of tightly wrapped scrolls arranged with care. They were positioned in parallel rows, elevated slightly above the chamber floor on stone supports, a method known from ancient preservation practices to reduce contact with ground moisture. The material showed minimal degradation, consistent with long-term storage in low-humidity conditions. Faint markings resembling early Hebrew script were visible on several wrappings. Not decorative in style, but functional, serving as identifiers rather than ornamentation. Nothing appeared disturbed. There were no signs of collapse, intrusion, or hurried placement. The chamber showed no evidence of flooding, animal activity, or structural stress. Even fine sediment on horizontal surfaces remained evenly distributed, indicating prolonged stillness. At the center of the space lay organic remains reduced by time to mineralized form, positioned close to the scrolls. The arrangement suggested intention rather than accident placement, rather than displacement, without signs of struggle or sudden movement. Archaeological assessment noted that the construction did not correspond to known indigenous architectural traditions of the region, nor to any documented modern activity. The stonework, layout, and symbolic markings pointed toward a different origin, one without a clear historical footprint in local records. That absence, combined with the careful preservation methods, raised questions not about damage or disruption, but about purpose. In the Old Testament, there are repeated references to words and testimonies being sealed until an appointed time. Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Daniel 12-9. The emphasis is not secrecy for its own sake, but timing knowledge withheld until conditions are right for recognition rather than discovery alone. Scripture frames such preservation as deliberate, not accidental. The emergence of these buried texts at this moment stands alongside other subtle shifts across land and environment. Nothing broke, nothing collapsed. Yet something hidden surfaced intact, as if exposure itself was the signal. When materials designed to remain unseen for generations appear without force or damage, the question shifts. It is no longer about how they survived, but why they are visible now. And in a season already marked by alignment rather than chaos, that timing may be the most telling element of all, and unmistakable to those willing to see. The pattern now forming raises a final, unavoidable question. If this is not coincidence, then what is it preparing us for? And are we paying attention before the next sign appears? Here is a rewritten version that keeps the same context, softens damage, focuses on natural systems and environments, adds one grounded detail, includes a clear, intentional pause, bolded, and strengthens the Old Testament connection without becoming declarative. At first glance, each occurrence can be read on its own. An unusual storm pattern, an unexpected sound, a rare movement beneath the surface. Taken separately, none of these moments demands alarm. Nature is complex, and variability is expected. But when these developments are set side by side, their alignment becomes harder to overlook. They are not scattered across generations or confined to a single environment. They are appearing within the same span of time across different regions involving air, water, land, and what has long remained concealed beneath it. What distinguishes this moment is not intensity, but reach. Atmospheric systems behave out of sequence. Aquatic life moves in coordinated ways without visible stressors. The ground shifts just enough to reveal what had been stable for decades. Even sealed spaces designed to remain unchanged are exposed without force or collapse. These are subtle responses, not violent ones, yet they span multiple layers of the natural world at once. Nothing breaks. Nothing fails. Yet nothing remains untouched. Researchers can point to mechanisms behind each event. Weather follows pressure. Living organisms react to unseen stimuli. Geological layers adjust over time. Discoveries occur when conditions allow access. These explanations are valid, but explanation does not dissolve pattern. When low-probability events begin to cluster, timing itself becomes a variable worth examining. The question shifts from whether each event is possible to why they are converging now. In the Old Testament, periods of transition are often marked by convergence rather than catastrophe. Signs appear across creation in sequence, not to overwhelm, but to signal. "I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth," writes the prophet Joel, Joel 2:30, describing moments when multiple domains respond together. The emphasis is not destruction, but recognition. Creation reacting before understanding catches up. What makes the current alignment unsettling is its coherence. Each response seems to prepare the ground for the next. Atmospheric disruption is followed by movement in water. Shifts beneath the surface coincide with exposure above it. Nothing resets. The sequence continues. The outline grows clearer not through escalation, but through accumulation. This moment does not require immediate conclusions, but it does require attention. Patterns exist to be noticed, not explained away. When changes occur across systems that rarely respond together, they suggest a broader adjustment underway, one that cannot be isolated to a single cause or category. Scripture suggests that warnings rarely arrive alone. They come layered, repeated, and distributed clear, not because they are loud, but because they are consistent. If this alignment is more than coincidence, then its purpose may not be to provoke fear, but to prompt awareness. The question that remains is quiet, but persistent. If these signs are preparatory rather than final, what are they making room for, And will they be recognized before the pattern advances again? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and keep an eye out for our next video. Leave a comment and let us know what you think.
Fascinated by the phenomenon, he recorded a video as a memory and asked a local about it. White ring high above the clouds.
Oh, blessed Jesus, look at that. How many?
Have you noticed how strange events are happening almost at the same time? Across the United States, with no rain and no alert, thick, muddy water violently erupted from the ground, ripping through streets as people ran in panic. At the very same time, the sky demanded attention. A flawless blue ring appeared overhead, perfectly formed, suspended as if time itself paused. Then a cloud emerged, shaped unmistakably like a human figure, arms stretched wide, glowing quietly in the sunlight. Moments later, fire tore through the sky, a blazing object igniting, fragmenting, then vanishing without a trace. These weren't isolated events. They happened together below our feet and above our heads. Coincidence, or a signal we were meant to notice? If something feels off, hit like and stay with me. Just moments ago, residents in Reading witnessed something no one expects to see in an ordinary American city. There was no storm warning, no heavy rain pounding the streets, no buildup. And then, without notice, the ground itself erupted. From intact pavement, thick, muddy water burst upward with force, shooting into the air like columns driven from beneath the earth. This was not water flowing downhill. It was not runoff. It rose violently, as if pressure had been building unseen, waiting for the exact moment to break through. The water was dark and heavy, saturated with sediment. It carried the color and weight of something pulled from deep underground layers, not from surface drains. Witnesses described the shock of watching normal city roads transform into unstable ground in seconds. Cars were pushed off course. Streets became impassable. People could be heard retreating, shouting warnings, stepping back as if the earth itself had become unsafe to stand on. This was not a slow failure. It was sudden, aggressive, disruptive. The kind of event that leaves people silent afterward, struggling to understand what they just saw. Officials moved quickly to calm the situation. Explanations followed: aging infrastructure, ruptured pipes, underground pressure, familiar words, logical terms. Yet even as explanations circulated, unease remained. Because infrastructure failures do not usually behave like eruptions. They leak, they crack, they sink. What happened here forced water upward, violently, as though something below had been released all at once. That distinction matters. In Scripture, when catastrophic water events are described, the focus is not only on rain from above. In the account of Noah's flood, Genesis records something far more unsettling. The fountains of the great deep were broken up. Judgment did not begin solely with clouds opening. It began with the earth itself failing from below. That detail is often overlooked, but it changes the picture entirely. Water rising from beneath speaks of instability, where people assume permanence. Roads are built on the belief that the ground will hold. Cities expand on the assumption that what lies below is solid, predictable, and controlled. When that assumption fails, it shakes more than infrastructure. It shakes confidence. The events in Reading force an uncomfortable question into the open. If water can suddenly surge upward from unseen depths, what else lies beneath our systems, our cities, our sense of security? And how much pressure is building out of sight? This was not rain overwhelming drains. This was the ground asserting itself without warning. Scripture consistently uses the earth's behavior as a sign not to provoke panic, but to provoke awareness. When foundations tremble or break open, the message is not merely physical, it is symbolic. It reminds people that stability is not guaranteed simply because yesterday felt normal. When water rises from below instead of falling from above, it signals that something foundational has shifted. And once foundations begin to move, events rarely remain isolated. While the ground was violently breaking open below, the story did not remain confined to the streets. Almost at the same time, attention was drawn upward, far above the chaos unfolding on the Earth's surface. As if the disturbance below was being mirrored above, something unusual appeared in the sky that demanded explanation. Passengers aboard a commercial flight captured footage of a perfectly defined blue circle suspended among the clouds. It was not faint. It was not distorted. It was sharply outlined, vivid in color, and unmistakably circular. Against the shifting white and gray of surrounding cloud layers, this formation stood apart, unnaturally precise, visually isolated, and impossible to ignore. Unlike ordinary cloud patterns, the blue circle did not drift with the wind. It did not stretch, thin out, or dissolve as clouds normally do. It remained still, fixed, held in place, as if anchored. While nearby clouds shifted and flowed, this formation maintained its structure, giving the unsettling impression of something intentional rather than atmospheric. Observers struggled to describe what they were seeing. Many said it resembled an opening like a doorway or gate suspended in the heavens. Others compared it to a lens or aperture, as though the sky itself had been punctured for a brief moment. What unsettled viewers most was not its color or shape, but its behavior. The sky was moving. The circle was not. That contrast matters. In the same way, the eruption of water from the ground defied expectations of how infrastructure fails, this formation defied expectations of how clouds behave. Both events challenged what people assume is stable, predictable, and understood. Below, the earth forced its way upward. Above, the heavens appeared to hold something open. Biblical texts frequently describe moments when the heavens were opened, before periods of warning, revelation, or transition. These moments were not described as permanent changes, but as brief openings, windows through which humanity was allowed to glimpse something beyond the ordinary flow of time and nature. That language is striking when placed beside modern footage of a perfectly shaped opening in the sky. Scripture often presents signs in layers, the earth responding, the sky responding, and humanity standing in between, forced to interpret, forced to choose whether to dismiss or to pay attention. Rarely are warnings isolated to one realm. When both below and above react, the message becomes harder to ignore. This raises a sobering question. If the ground beneath our feet is breaking open, while the sky above displays signs that resist natural explanation, are we witnessing coincidence or coordination? Are these simply rare anomalies captured at the same time, or signals aligned to draw attention from both directions at once? Moments like this are not meant to entertain, they are meant to awaken. Stay with me, because what appeared next in the sky only deepens the pattern and the urgency. Not long after the blue circle faded from view, another image began to circulate, one that carried a very different weight. This time, it was not geometry or color that drew attention, but form. A cloud formation appeared that bore a striking resemblance to a human figure, upright and unmistakable in posture. The shape was not abstract. A head-like outline was visible. A torso seemed defined. Arms appeared extended outward, not raised in motion, but open still, deliberate, and balanced. What unsettled many viewers was not how dramatic it looked, but how recognizable it felt. The human mind searches for patterns, yet this shape required little imagination to perceive. Surrounding the figure was a soft, golden glow. It was not intense or blinding. There was no flash, no burst of light, no spectacle demanding fear. Instead, the glow appeared calm, almost gentle, as if illuminating the figure without overwhelming the sky around it. The clouds did not churn violently. The scene did not erupt into chaos. It simply appeared. Those who witnessed it did not react with panic. There were no screams, no frantic movements. Instead, many stood still. Some filmed silently. Others lowered their phones altogether, as if recording suddenly felt insufficient. The dominant reaction was quiet attention, the kind that happens when people sense meaning but struggle to articulate it. Throughout the Bible, clouds are repeatedly linked with divine presence, guidance, and authority. From the pillar of cloud that led Israel through the wilderness, to the cloud that descended upon Mount Sinai, to the cloud that overshadowed Jesus at the Transfiguration, clouds are portrayed not as random backdrops, but as vehicles of revelation. They conceal and reveal at the same time. What makes this image unsettling is not that it demanded belief. It did not. It made no announcement. It issued no threat. It arrived without instruction and faded without explanation. Yet its presence lingered longer than more dramatic sights often do. There was no spectacle to debate, only an image that quietly impressed itself upon memory. Unlike events that shock through violence or destruction, this moment unsettled through restraint. It did not force interpretation. It invited reflection. That difference sets it apart. In times of relative calm, such imagery might be dismissed as coincidence, illusion, or imagination. But context matters. This appearance came amid growing global unrest, political instability, environmental disruption, social fracture, and widespread anxiety. When foundations feel unstable, people become more sensitive to symbols that suggest authority, oversight, or presence beyond human control. The question left behind is not whether this image proves anything. Scripture itself warns against chasing signs for proof alone. The deeper question is why imagery so closely associated with divine symbolism continues appearing during a period marked by uncertainty and tension across the world. Not every message arrives with thunder. Some appear quietly, framed in clouds, leaving behind not answers, but unease, reflection, and the sense that something greater may be observing as history accelerates. Videos began surfacing that showed something few could immediately explain: a glowing spherical object suspended high in the sky. It was not blinking. It did not move like an aircraft. It appeared steady, bright, and isolated against the darkness, drawing attention simply by existing where nothing else should have been. Then, without warning, the object changed. The glow intensified. A sudden ignition followed. The sphere appeared to rupture, breaking apart as fiery fragments scattered downward, streaking briefly before fading from view. The transformation was fast, violent, and unmistakable. What moments earlier looked contained and whole became unstable, burning itself apart in mid-air. Witnesses struggled to identify what they were seeing. The event did not match common descriptions of commercial aircraft, military flares, or routine space activity. There was no visible trajectory consistent with normal flight paths, no controlled descent, no familiar pattern, just ignition, fragmentation, and disappearance. As footage spread, questions multiplied. Officials did not immediately confirm the object as a meteor, satellite re-entry, or controlled test. No clear explanation followed in real time. That absence of certainty only heightened the tension surrounding the event. When fire appears in the heavens without context, people instinctively sense that it matters. Throughout Scripture, burning objects in the sky are rarely treated as meaningless. Burning stars, falling fire, and lights descending from above are consistently linked to warning, judgment, or transition, not random destruction. In Revelation, a great star, burning like a torch, falls from heaven. In prophetic language, fire in the sky often signals disruption to what feels permanent and secure. The symbolism is hard to ignore. Fire represents exposure. It consumes, reveals, and transforms. When something burns in the heavens, it suggests instability in what people assume is distant, untouchable, and ordered. The sky has long been viewed as a realm of consistency: sunrise, sunset, stars fixed in their courses. When that order appears disturbed, even briefly, it commands attention. Whether this object was natural or unknown is almost beside the point. The visual itself carried weight. A luminous body igniting and breaking apart above the earth adds urgency to an already unsettling sequence of events. Ground ruptures below. Signs form in the sky. Figures appear in clouds. And now, fire falls from above. Patterns matter more than isolated explanations. Scripture often describes warning not as a single event, but as accumulation signs layered one upon another, increasing in frequency and intensity. Each individual occurrence can be rationalized. Together, they create pressure. They force awareness. They demand interpretation. This burning object did not cause visible destruction on the ground, yet its impact was psychological. It reinforced a sense that things once assumed stable are becoming unpredictable. That boundaries between earth and sky, known and unknown, are being tested. When fire appears above, humanity instinctively looks up. And when people look up, they begin to ask questions they've avoided. If this feels significant to you, press like, leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and stay with me, because when signs begin stacking like this, they rarely stop with just one. As fire appeared in the heavens and instability revealed itself above the earth, another sign surfaced far from cities and skylines, hidden beneath slow-moving water, out of ordinary sight. While attention was fixed upward, something below was shifting in silence. Deep within the wetlands of South Florida's Everglades, footage emerged showing a sight few were prepared to process. Dozens, then hundreds of massive Burmese pythons, some exceeding 6 meters in length, were captured moving together beneath the surface. These were not isolated sightings, not a single snake crossing a camera's frame. This was scale, density, motion repeating itself across wide stretches of water. What made the footage unsettling was not size alone. It was coordination. The pythons did not scatter. They did not hunt independently. They did not display the solitary, territorial behavior typically associated with apex predators. Instead, they flowed in the same direction, bodies sliding through dark water in near unison, adjusting speed and spacing as if responding to a shared signal. Observers described it as less like animals and more like a system, many bodies, one movement. Scientists moved quickly to offer explanations: seasonal migration, breeding convergence, environmental pressure. Yet even within those explanations came a critical admission. This level of large-scale synchronization is extremely rare. Burmese pythons are typically solitary. They do not form coordinated masses. They do not move together across such distances in such numbers. That rarity is the point. When behavior deviates sharply from what is considered normal, it signals disruption, either in habitat, instinct, or pressure, unseen from above the surface. Something changed. Something triggered movement on a scale not commonly observed in the American landscape. In biblical symbolism, great serpents and creatures of the deep are rarely neutral imagery. They represent forces hidden beneath order, power restrained, chaos contained, threats that remain unseen until conditions allow them to surface. Scripture often contrasts signs in the heavens with stirrings in the depths, placing humanity between what is above and what is below. The Everglades has long been viewed as ancient, resilient, and quietly enduring. A place where time moves differently, where layers of history overlap beneath water and grass. When something massive moves there in unison, it suggests a response to conditions deeper than surface explanations, pressures building over time, now released. Water, in Scripture, often symbolizes separation between realms, the visible and the concealed, the controlled and the uncontrollable. When creatures of the deep begin to move collectively, it implies that boundaries are being tested, balance is shifting, restraint is loosening. This footage did not come with immediate destruction. No towns were overrun, no sudden catastrophe followed. But warning does not always arrive as impact. Sometimes it arrives as pattern repetition, scale, alignment, fire above, signs in the sky, earth breaking open. And now, synchronized movement beneath American waters. When the deep begins to stir, Scripture suggests it is not random. It points to something long, restrained, responding to a change in conditions. Something dormant, reacting to a signal. The chilling thought is not what the pythons were doing, but why now? In another region, far from the earlier sightings, the sky took on a color few people forget once they see it. Dark storm clouds rolled in slowly, but instead of the usual gray or deep blue, they carried an unnatural greenish glow. It was the kind of color that immediately signals danger, not just weather, but severity. The air felt heavy. The light felt wrong. As lightning began flashing within the clouds, the sky briefly revealed something more disturbing. Each burst of light carved shadows into the cloud mass, and within those shadows, shapes began to form. Not random outlines, not fleeting blurs. Many viewers described seeing a figure resembling a multi-headed creature, broad, looming, and asymmetrical, emerging and vanishing with each flash. The image was never sharp enough to capture details with certainty. No clear edges, no fixed outline. Yet, it was distinct enough that people independently described the same thing. Social media filled with slowed footage, screenshots, and frame-by-frame analysis. The discussion spread, not because the image was obvious, but because it was persistent. Skeptics were quick to respond. Optical illusion, they said. A combination of lightning angles, cloud density, and human pattern recognition. The brain, searching for meaning where none exists. And those explanations are not without merit. Storm systems are capable of producing strange visual effects, especially when light refracts through dense cloud layers. But explanation does not always erase impact. Others pointed out something harder to dismiss: the resemblance to ancient symbolic imagery, particularly descriptions found in the Book of Revelation. In biblical language, multi-headed beasts are not zoological creatures. They are representations. Symbols of chaotic power, rebellion, and systems that grow beyond moral restraint. They are not meant to be photographed clearly. They are meant to be recognized. The Bible consistently uses unsettling imagery not to provoke terror, but to awaken discernment. When such symbols appear, they signal conditions rather than events unchecked. Authority, distorted power, moral disorder rising beneath the surface of normal life. These visions are not predictions in themselves. They are warnings about the state of the world. Green clouds themselves are already associated with extreme instability. They often precede violent storms, hail, or tornadoes, moments when atmospheric balance collapses. When such clouds produce imagery that stirs ancient symbolic memory, it deepens the unease. Not because the shape must mean something, but because of when it appears. This was not a peaceful sky. It was not a neutral moment. It arrived during a period already saturated with strange signs: ruptures below ground, formations above the clouds, fire in the heavens, movement in the deep. Context gives weight to coincidence. Whether illusion or symbol, the shadowed shape added to a growing list of unsettling sky phenomena, each one alone explainable, each one together increasingly difficult to dismiss. Scripture warns that when disorder grows unchecked, signs multiply, not always to predict what comes next, but to reveal what already is. The green glow faded, the storm passed, but the image remained etched, not in the sky, but in memory. And in times like these, what lingers after the clouds move on often matters more than what appeared within them. As unsettling images continued appearing in the skies and storms hinted at forces beyond human control, another warning unfolded on the ground, this time with devastating consequences. In the U.S. state of Michigan, a dam failed with little to no warning. Within moments, massive floodwaters were unleashed, surging forward with unstoppable force. Entire neighborhoods were caught off guard. Homes that had stood for decades were swallowed in hours. Streets vanished beneath rushing water. Families fled with only what they could carry, while others scrambled for higher ground as the flood closed in. What shocked residents most was the speed. There was no gradual failure, no long evacuation window. One moment the structure held, the next, it was gone, its absence felt before it was fully understood. Sirens came too late for many. The water moved faster than warnings. Hundreds of families were displaced in a matter of hours. Lives were uprooted instantly. Schools, small businesses, and whole blocks disappeared beneath muddy currents. What had been familiar became unrecognizable, reduced to debris and silence. Officials cited heavy rainfall and structural weakness. The explanations were technically sound, yet emotionally hollow, because dams exist to restrain what cannot be controlled. When they fail, the trust placed in them collapses as completely as the barrier itself. Scripture has long warned about this kind of confidence. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Matthew 7:27. The message is not about weather, it is about foundations. What appears solid can still give way when pressure arrives. This tragedy was not imagination or interpretation. It was physical, measurable, irreversible, and that is why it matters within a broader pattern. Ground breaking open, skies twisting, fire appearing above, the deep stirring, and now, a man-made barrier failing in minutes. Warnings do not always come wrapped in mystery. Sometimes they arrive as collapse, exposing how quickly normalcy can vanish. If this resonates, leave a comment and stay alert. In a scene that seemed to defy instinct and memory, thick snow blanketed parts of the American desert land, long defined by heat, drought, and open sky. In Arizona, stretches of desert terrain disappeared beneath white drifts. Cactus-lined roads, rocky hills, and wide plains were transformed into a landscape more closely associated with high mountains than the Southwest. Residents were filmed walking through snow, laughing, touching it, even playing in it, acts once unimaginable in a region shaped by relentless sun. Meteorologists were quick to respond. Rare, they said, but possible. A collision of cold air, elevation, and seasonal anomalies, technically explainable. Statistically unlikely, but still within nature's extremes. Yet, explanation did little to soften the feeling that something fundamental had been reversed. Deserts are symbols of permanence. Their identity is stable, dry, predictable. They represent heat that does not easily surrender. When snow falls, they're not briefly, not as a dusting, but thick enough to settle. It feels less like weather and more like interruption. Biblical prophecy often frames moments of warning not only through destruction, but through inversion, the natural order, bending in unexpected ways. Heat turning to cold, dryness yielding to ice. The familiar behaving unfamiliar. Scripture speaks of times when creation itself reacts, when balance shifts. And what humanity assumes is fixed proves flexible. Snow in the desert carries symbolic weight because it contradicts expectation. It confronts certainty. It asks a question without words. If even this can change, what else is not as permanent as it seems? Historically, deserts in Scripture are places of testing, silence, and revelation. They are landscapes where distractions fall away and truth becomes unavoidable. When such a place is suddenly covered in snow, the symbolism sharpens. Cold, where heat should dominate. Moisture, where dryness rules. Stillness replacing severity. Patterns once considered impossible are no longer hypothetical. They are appearing on camera, in real time, witnessed by ordinary people. Snowstorms in deserts, heat waves in frozen regions, floods where rain is rare. Each event can be explained in isolation. Together, they form a broader picture of instability. Biblical texts describe times when creation groans under imbalance, reflecting moral, spiritual, and systemic disorder. Not because nature has intent, but because it mirrors disruption. When extremes multiply, Scripture does not call for panic. It calls for awareness. What unsettles many observers is not simply that snow fell in the American desert, but how unshocking such events are becoming. The extraordinary is becoming familiar. The impossible is becoming documented. Each reversal lowers the threshold for the next. Heat turning to cold, sand turning to snow, certainty turning into question. This is not about predicting catastrophe. It is about recognizing a pattern of disruption that crosses geography, culture, and expectation. When deserts freeze and oceans warm, when skies burn and ground collapses, the message is consistent. What once felt stable is no longer guaranteed. Snow in the American desert is not just a weather anomaly. It is a reminder that the order humanity relies on, natural, social, spiritual, can shift faster than expected. And when reversals begin, Scripture suggests they are meant to be noticed, not dismissed. The sand remembers heat. The snow remembers cold. And when they occupy the same place, they force a question humanity has always struggled to answer. What happens when the world we recognize starts behaving like one we don't? Taken one by one, each event can be explained, debated, categorized, and eventually filed away. A flood here, a strange cloud there, fire in the sky, snow in the desert, movement in the deep, structural collapse, rare but possible, unusual but not unprecedented. That is how the modern world learns to cope with distance, labels, and reassurance. But Scripture has never warned humanity through isolated moments alone. It speaks of convergence. A world out of balance is not defined by a single disaster, but by many disruptions occurring across different realms at the same time. Above and below, land and sea, heat and cold, stability and collapse. When imbalance spreads across systems that rarely intersect, it signals more than coincidence. It signals strain. The Bible often describes the last days not as a sudden end, but as a period of acceleration, birth pains that increase in frequency and intensity. Not every pain ends the process, but each one confirms that something irreversible has begun. The signs are not meant to terrify, but to awaken discernment in a distracted world. What makes this moment unsettling is not just what is happening, but how familiar it is becoming. Events that once would have dominated global attention now pass quickly, replaced by the next anomaly. The human mind adapts. Shock fades. The abnormal becomes background noise, and that desensitization is itself a warning. A balanced world behaves predictably. Seasons follow patterns. Foundations hold. The sky remains ordered. The deep remains hidden. When balance erodes, unpredictability spreads. Systems strain. Extremes replace moderation. Scripture describes this not merely as environmental instability, but as a reflection of deeper disorder, moral confusion, spiritual apathy, and misplaced trust. Warnings in the Bible are rarely loud all at once. They are layered, repeated, reinforced from different directions. Some come through nature, others through collapse, others through imagery that lingers in the mind long after it fades from sight. The purpose is not to provide dates or timelines, but to force a choice. Ignore the signs or examine the foundation you are standing on. A world out of balance presses humanity into uncomfortable questions. What is truly secure? What has been assumed permanent without examination? Where has confidence replaced humility? Scripture consistently teaches that when people trust structures, systems, and normalcy more than truth, warning signs multiply. This is not a call to panic. Panic blinds. This is a call to awareness. Awareness sharpens. Jesus himself said that when these things begin to happen, those who are watching will recognize the season, not because they fear the end, but because they understand the message. The signs are not the destination. They are the signal. If this perspective resonates with you, press like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more, and thank you for watching.
Hold on.
Oh my god! Look at the size of that foot!
While coastal cities across America vanish beneath rare, violent storms like a warning shot fired at an unprepared nation, California is receiving the message in a far more unsettling way. The ground is splitting. The waters are rising. And from beneath the earth, something long buried is being exposed. Something never meant to resurface. These are not isolated disasters. They are converging signals. The kind Scripture warned would come before the end, when the earth itself begins to testify. Is this divine intervention? Or the final warning before a greater event unfolds? What has now been revealed is leaving experts silent and believers shaken. Before we reveal what was found, subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell us below, do you recognize the signs? Amid climate chaos and social tension, a different kind of story emerges in California. Not in the headlines of politics, but in the silence of an ancient canyon. Kings Canyon, a glacier-carved valley over a mile deep in the Sierra Nevada of California, is known for towering granite walls, icy rivers, and nearby giant sequoia groves that have watched centuries go by. It is the kind of place people visit to feel small next to mountains and time. And now, it has become the place where the ground itself seems to open its mouth. There, as workers dug beneath the surface, they did not hit concrete or modern infrastructure, but a buried stone slab that appears to have lain hidden for generations. Its markings are not random scratches or modern graffiti, but deliberate, carved symbols that do not neatly match known tools, recent activity, or any familiar local tradition. It feels out of place, both in time and in context. What makes this discovery unsettling is not only what people think the symbols might suggest, references to an end time or a closing era, but when the stone surfaced, it did not emerge in an age of calm, when the nation felt stable and secure. It surfaced at a moment when land is collapsing in the West, waters behave strangely in coastal cities, lives are cut off suddenly, and the social fabric feels increasingly fragile. The stone was buried deep, well below casual reach, as if it was meant to stay out of sight until a different generation walked the surface above it. The soil that covered it was not just dust and rock, it was forgetfulness. When that layer was finally disturbed, what came up was not just geology. It was a question. Why now? Why did this message rise from American ground in this particular season of upheaval, and not a century earlier or later? Scripture repeatedly teaches a spiritual principle. What is concealed does not remain concealed forever. For there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, and nothing hidden that will not be made known. Luke 12:2. See also Mark 4:22. In the Bible, buried things, scrolls, prophecies, warnings, and signs do not surface when they are first created, but when their purpose is ready to be revealed, when people need to see them. Revelation follows God's timing, not human curiosity. If the King's Canyon stone is viewed through that lens, the question shifts. It is no longer only about which culture carved it or which tool touched its surface.
Part of Colorado's Rocky Mountain National Park remains closed following a major rock fall in an area known as Chaos Canyon.
Look at the size of this fish compared to my foot.
Our headline story tonight centers on a wave of disturbing events sweeping across the United States. In Colorado, mountainsides are collapsing without warning, sending entire slopes sliding into silence. Along the Gulf Coast, deep-sea creatures are washing ashore in a single, unbroken line stretching for miles. And in the Midwest, crops have begun dying overnight, as if drained of life in a matter of hours. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery came from beneath the soil of Oklahoma, a newly exposed cavern, revealing symbols linked to ancient prophetic warnings. These events are not isolated. They are happening simultaneously. The question is no longer what is happening, but what may be awakening beneath us. Before we continue, like this video, subscribe, and stay with us. What comes next may change how you see this moment. Across the high ridges of Colorado, the land has begun to fail in ways residents have never seen before. Entire mountainsides are collapsing without warning. Slopes that stood firm for centuries are now sliding away in massive sheets of rock and soil. Roads are torn apart, trails disappear in minutes, and once stable cliffs crumble into silence, leaving deep scars carved into the landscape. What makes these collapses especially disturbing is not just the destruction, but the complete lack of warning. There were no earthquakes, no storms, no dramatic trigger on seismic instruments. Instead, the mountains simply gave way. One moment stillness, the next a roaring cascade of stone. Experts offer scientific theories: melting permafrost, unseen erosion deep inside the rock, or ancient fractures slowly widening over decades. But even they admit these explanations cannot fully account for the speed and silence of the collapse. For those living nearby, the fear goes far beyond geology. Residents describe a feeling that something deeper is shifting, something beneath the surface that is no longer holding. It is the loss of trust in the ground itself. Scripture speaks of foundations that appear solid but are weakened from within, slowly eroding until the moment they finally break. The collapse rarely begins when people notice it. It begins long before, hidden and unseen, until the structure can no longer bear its own weight. What looks strong on the outside is already fractured below. This is what makes Colorado's events so unsettling. They are not isolated incidents. They are happening repeatedly and in places known for their stability. The pattern suggests more than random erosion. It resembles exposure, weak points, revealing themselves all at once, as if the land is uncovering what has been hidden beneath it for years. The question is no longer why a single mountainside fell. Nature has always eroded. The deeper question is why these collapses are happening now, in multiple locations, with no warning signs, and what that means for the land across the rest of the country. Because while the mountains of Colorado crumble in silence, another disturbing sign is emerging far away along the Gulf Coast, not from the ground beneath us, but from the depths of the ocean. Along the Gulf Coast, a scene both eerie and unnatural has begun to unfold. Fishermen discovered a long, unbroken line of deep-sea creatures washed ashore, stretching for miles alive and uninjured. These aren't typical coastal species. These animals live far below the surface, in darkness and pressure so intense that sunlight never reaches them. What makes this phenomenon even more alarming is the way it happened. There were no storms pushing marine life toward land. They are not fleeing storms or predators. They simply appear, as if something beneath the ocean has changed and pushed them upward. Marine biologists rushed to investigate. Some point to temperature shifts, underwater disturbances, or changes in ocean currents. But even with these theories, the timing and scale remain difficult to explain. These events are not spread out over many years. They are happening within a short time together. Scripture often describes the deep, the waters below, as a place of mysteries unknown, forces beyond human control. When the deep gives up what it holds, it is portrayed as a sign that something hidden is being exposed. These moments are not always violent. Sometimes they are quiet, calm, yet deeply unsettling. They suggest that boundaries set in place are beginning to loosen. The real question, then, is not what washed ashore, but what pushed them up from below. And if the sea is revealing what it once concealed, what else may be preparing to surface? In Scripture, revelation often comes before reckoning. Before events fully unfold, signs appear not to cause panic, but to draw attention. The deep rising along the Gulf Coast may be one of those signs, quietly reminding us that what is hidden does not stay hidden forever. As the deep sea reveals its secrets along the coast, another warning rises from the heartland, not from water, but from the land itself, where life is disappearing overnight. Across the Midwest, farmers are waking up to fields that look as though life has been drained out of them in a single night. Rows of corn, wheat, and soybeans, once green and thriving, are turning gray and brittle before the sun rises. What troubles farmers the most is not just the loss, but the speed. No drought announcement, no disease spreading week by week, no insects swarming the fields. The change is sudden and silent. In Scripture, Fields and harvests often symbolize the health of a nation, its stability, its future, its connection to provision. When crops wither suddenly, it is described not merely as agricultural failure, but as a sign that something deeper is shifting. The question is not why crops die. Nature has always had cycles of failure. The deeper question is why they are dying now, so quickly, and across so many states at once, and what this silence is preparing us to notice. Maybe another warning is unfolding beneath this calm surface. Not in the open fields, but underground, where something carved in ancient stone has finally been exposed. Deep beneath the soil of Oklahoma, something unexpected has surfaced. After weeks of heavy rain, a section of earth near an old ranch collapsed inward, revealing the mouth of a cavern no one knew existed. Local authorities assumed it was another sinkhole. Nothing more. But when teams lowered cameras into the opening, they realized the ground had not simply fallen. It had uncovered something that had been sealed away for a very long time. Inside the cavern, the rock walls were smooth, unnaturally smooth, as if shaped or cleared by deliberate hands. And carved into the stone near the back of the chamber were markings unlike anything documented in the region. Archaeologists brought in to examine the site immediately noted the strangeness of the symbols. They do not match known Native American languages, they do not resemble Spanish colonial markings, and they are not geological fractures. Instead, they appear purposeful, cut into the stone with precision and intention. What makes this discovery even more unsettling is not the symbols themselves, but their placement. They are carved deep within a sealed space, positioned where no sunlight could ever reach, in a chamber that appears to have been intentionally hidden. Whoever created these markings did not place them for decoration, they placed them to be preserved. In Scripture, hidden writings often accompany moments of revelation, messages not meant for the present, but for a time when they would be understood. Carved stone becomes a witness, a reminder, a warning set aside until a specific moment arrives. It raises a quiet, unsettling question. If something was carved with the intention of being found later, why now? What the symbols mean is still unknown. Why they were hidden is still unknown. But their emergence comes at a time when other signs, land, sea, and sky, are shifting as well. And now, with the earth revealing what it once concealed, a larger question rises to the surface. Are these discoveries connected, or are they simply happening too close together to ignore? As the ground opens in Oklahoma, the attention of researchers now turns back to Colorado, where new fractures suggest the land may not be finished moving. While researchers in Oklahoma study symbols carved in darkness, another development has begun to unfold back in Colorado. The mountains that collapsed only days ago are not settling. Instead, new fractures thin, clean, and strangely uniform are appearing across surrounding ridges. At first, hikers reported narrow lines cutting through the soil, the kind people often overlook. But within hours, those lines deepened, stretching across slopes that had never shown signs of instability before. Sections of rock shifted quietly, almost gracefully, without the violent breakage usually associated with landslides. These are not dramatic collapses. There is no roar, no dust cloud, no sudden downward movement, just slow separation, mountain stone pulling apart as though something beneath the surface is gently widening the divide. Geologists examining the area note that the fractures do not behave like typical stress lines. These experiences are subtle, but they are appearing repeatedly, and they are happening in places that historically remain stable for decades at a time. In ancient texts, fractures in the land often symbolize division moments when what was once whole begins to separate. Not immediately, but gradually, the way a seam opens before a fabric tears. It is the kind of change that starts quietly and becomes visible only when the separation has gone too far to ignore. The question is not whether mountains crack. They always have. The question is why these fractures are forming now, so widely, so suddenly, and in patterns that look less like erosion and more like preparation. Because this time, the mountains are not falling. They are opening. Across the United States, these events seemed unrelated at first. A collapsing mountainside in Colorado, deep-sea creatures rising to the surface along the Gulf Coast, crops in the Midwest dying in a single night, a hidden chamber in Oklahoma revealing ancient markings. Each incident could be explained on its own. Land erodes, currents shift, harvests fail, stone breaks open. But when they begin happening within days of each other, each in a different region, each involving a different element of nature, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. It is not the scale of any single event, but the timing. The way they appear to move in sequence, one after another, as though the land, the sea, and everything beneath them are responding to the same unseen pressure. What stands out most is the silence. No great storm sweeping across the country, no single catastrophe connecting them. Just quiet changes happening everywhere at once. In ancient writings, convergence is described as a moment when separate signs begin to echo each other, different in form, but united in direction. Not dramatic at first, but subtle, like distant drums aligning into a single rhythm, a pattern forming long before people recognize it. That is the atmosphere of this moment. Not chaos, not collapse, but alignment. The land loosens, the sea releases, the fields withdraw, the earth opens. Not violently, but steadily, like thresholds shifting before anyone notices the doorway has moved. For many, the question is no longer what is happening in each location, but why everything is happening now. Why these regions? Why these days? Why these signs? Different, yet strangely synchronized. Scripture often describes such seasons as times of unveiling, not all at once, but piece by piece, until the full picture becomes impossible to overlook. The purpose is not fear. The purpose is awareness. A reminder that stability can change, boundaries can move, and what lies hidden beneath the surface eventually reveals itself. Whether these events mark the beginning of something larger, or are merely coincidences unfolding close together, is something no one can claim with certainty. But the convergence itself is the message, the quiet alignment of land, sea, and sky, pointing toward a shift that has not yet fully arrived. Because if these subtle signs are the beginning, the question that now follows is not what has happened, but what is approaching. As these quiet shifts continue to unfold across the country, one truth becomes increasingly difficult to overlook. The surface is no longer telling the full story. What we see above ground is only a fraction of what may now be moving underneath it. The signs we've witnessed on land, in the sea, and beneath the soil share a single thread that has not yet been pulled. Because for all the changes we can observe, there is something else happening in the background. Reports that have not yet made national headlines. Patterns that have not been discussed openly. Movements deeper than soil, deeper than water, deeper than stone. And if these earlier signs were the opening notes, then what follows next may reveal the source behind them. In ancient writings, the most significant shifts do not begin with what rises to the surface, but with what stirs below it. That is where we turn next. In the following part, we will examine a newly emerging set of findings, quiet readings from beneath multiple regions of the United States, suggesting that the ground itself may be responding to something moving far deeper than anyone first imagined. What is rising? What is awakening? And why now? Stay with us, because the next chapter may change how we understand every sign we've seen so far. Over the past several weeks, a new pattern has begun to emerge, one that does not stay in a single region or follow a predictable path. Instead, it moves across the map in a way that feels almost deliberate. From the northwest to the deep south, from the Gulf Coast to the Atlantic shore, different parts of the country are experiencing shifts that have no obvious connection, yet they are unfolding in a sequence too close to ignore. This is not one storm sweeping through, not one fault line acting up, not one ecosystem under strain. These events are appearing in separate places, involving different elements, yet happening within the same narrow window of time. Land splitting open in one region, water rising unexpectedly in another, sky patterns changing along the east coast, wind behavior shifting in areas that have never seen tornado activity. Each event makes sense on its own. Together, they form a line, a movement stretching from one edge of the country to the other. For the first time, what's happening is not confined to a single landscape or a single cause. It is spreading in arcs, from Oregon's mountains to Louisiana's rivers, from the eastern skies to regions long untouched by violent winds. A subtle momentum is taking shape, as though each region is responding to pressure from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. In ancient writings, moments like this are described not as chaos, but as alignment. Separate signs beginning to mirror each other, not in form, but in timing. A quiet synchronizing of land, water, sky, and wind, each shifting in its own way, yet echoing the same direction. And now, with this pattern stretching from coast to coast, the question is no longer whether the events are connected, but what is causing the movement underneath them.
We begin with the dangerous weather from coast to coast.
Oh my gosh. I'm going back.
Everything's gone. It's all gone.
It's okay.
Stop, I'm recording.
Across America, extreme and unsettling events are unfolding, leaving millions in fear as the ordinary begins to fall apart.
In Florida, the sky turned hostile, raining down ice that sounded like judgment drums. At the same time, the arteries of Indiana froze, blocking the nation's lifeline in its tracks. And deep beneath Utah, the cracking ground erased living things near Springdale and revealed warnings carved in stone. These events did not unfold one by one. They remained together at the same narrow time. Is this coincidence or a pattern too precise to ignore? If you feel the shift, if you hear the warning in the wind, you are not alone. Subscribe and like this video to stay alert, because the signs are no longer whispering. They are shouting. In Florida, the atmosphere darkened with unsettling speed. Thick, low-hanging clouds swallowed the sky, turning daylight dim and heavy. Winds intensified rapidly, driving sheets of rain that tore through streets and neighborhoods, carrying debris in their wake. Palm trees bent violently, high-rise buildings groaned under the pressure, and entire blocks seemed to sway as if caught in an uncontained tide. Gusts tore through open spaces, lifting loose objects and scattering them across roads and sidewalks. Crowds struggled to remain upright. Umbrellas snapped and were ripped from hands. What little people tried to hold on to was quickly torn away by the force of the storm. Along major roads, power lines snapped and collapsed, plunging neighborhoods into sudden darkness. Traffic lights failed. Large billboards and commercial signs were torn from their frames, sailing through the air like fallen leaves before crashing down onto streets and parking lots. In residential areas, families rushed indoors, barricading windows and doors as rain battered rooftops relentlessly. Inside homes, people huddled together, anxious for the safety of loved ones and fearful of what the storm might still bring. Then, beneath the deepening sky over Florida, the storm took a more dangerous turn. Dense, dark cloud formations thickened overhead, signaling the arrival of hail. The air grew cold, heavy, and oppressive. Raindrops hardened into ice. Small stones began to fall, striking roofs, vehicles, and pavement with sharp, metallic impacts that echoed through neighborhoods. Though some were no larger than snowballs, they fell with brutal force, colder, faster, and more punishing. Windows shattered. Roof shingles cracked. Cars parked along streets were pocked and dented within minutes. In agricultural areas, fields and gardens took the brunt of the assault. Fragile branches snapped. Unripe fruit was destroyed where it hung. Crops meant for harvest were stripped away in moments, delivering severe blows to local farmers and small agricultural operations. Residents caught outdoors, scrambled for shelter, shielding themselves from the barrage of frozen stones. The hail continued to fall, piling up along roadsides and lawns, coating the ground in an unnatural white layer resembling snow, but far denser and colder. Streets became slick and hazardous. Travel turned treacherous as vehicles slid and visibility dropped. In rural communities and small towns, families fought to protect livestock and essential belongings. Cattle, poultry, and other animals stood exposed, distressed by the cold, wind, and noise. Many went unfed and unprotected for hours, as conditions made movement dangerous. Emergency responders and state agencies mobilized quickly, navigating flooded roads and debris-filled highways to reach stranded residents. Despite limited visibility and hazardous conditions, rescue teams pressed forward, offering aid wherever possible. The aftermath revealed the scale of the damage. Storms, flooding, and hail across Florida resulted in widespread losses. Homes were damaged or destroyed. Vehicles were rendered unusable. Some residents were injured, others displaced. Infrastructure suffered heavily, roads washed out, bridges weakened, and water and electrical systems knocked offline, cutting off essential services to entire communities. The agricultural sector endured significant losses as well. Flooded land and destroyed crops led to reduced yields and economic strain, particularly for small farmers and rural families. Beyond immediate damage, environmental consequences followed. Polluted waterways, disrupted ecosystems, and long-term threats to wildlife and local biodiversity effects that will linger well beyond the storm itself. For many, it was just another historic storm, added to a growing list of disasters in Florida. But when a single state begins to see wind, flood, and hail tearing through homes, fields, and power lines all at once, the question changes. It is no longer only about how strong the storm was, but why now? Why such precision? Scripture describes a world that groans, like a creation in labor, straining under the weight of what humanity has built and believed. It speaks of days when the powers of the heaven will be shaken, when creation will not just groan, but reveal, when storms begin to strike not only one region, but from the oceans to the rivers, from the ground to the heavens. Some see only extreme weather. Others see a pattern that sounds uncomfortably close to what was written long ago. No one can say with absolute certainty which storm marks the moment. But history and scripture suggest that when chaos gives way to clarity, when destruction pauses and attention is drawn to a single place, the pattern changes. And shortly after the storms subsided, that change became impossible to ignore. What happened in the Gulf Coast was just the opening act. In the middle of a quiet Oregon forest at night, where only the wind moved through the trees and distant ridgelines faded into darkness, a monitoring satellite recorded something wholly unexpected. A perfect column of light appeared without warning, descending straight down into the forest clearing like a shaft drawn between sky and earth. The light formed a near-perfect circle on the ground, luminous and contained, remaining in place for just over a minute, some estimates say 60 seconds, others closer to 90, before vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. When local responders later reached the site, the scene offered more questions than answers. The ground within the circle was slightly warm to the touch, but the surrounding forest showed no damage. Leaves were intact. Branches were unscorched. There was no sign of fire, no charring, no smoke residue. The light had not burned or spread. It had simply illuminated and then withdrawn. Most striking of all, the circle it left behind was precise, its boundary clean and unbroken, as if deliberately marked. Environmental scientists and atmospheric specialists struggled to explain what had occurred. There was no lightning activity, no electrical storm, no known human source. No equipment failures were reported in the area. The event seemed to exist only in that brief window, appearing and disappearing without a trace. But when those who know scriptures viewed through a biblical lens, the imagery feels familiar. In Exodus 3-2, God appears in fire that does not consume, a presence revealed without destruction. Here, too, the light did not harm. It did not scorch the forest or alter the land. It arrived, shone with unmistakable clarity, and then receded, leaving the place changed not by damage, but by attention. Even those who dismissed divine intervention admitted privately that the alignment of events felt uncanny, as though orchestrated by a hand beyond human reach. For many believers, the meaning was immediate and terrifying. In Ezekiel 1, the prophet describes radiant light encircled within itself, surrounding divine glory, a symbol not of chaos, but of holiness and authority. From this perspective, the Oregon column of light becomes something more than an anomaly. It reads as a signal of illumination rather than judgment, a moment in which heaven briefly touched the earth without force. What deepens the significance is its timing. The light appeared only days after disturbances elsewhere, after the ground had shifted, after the land had spoken. First, the earth moved. Then, the light descended. Each event arrived suddenly, without a clear natural cause, unfolding as if in sequence, rather than isolation. Layer by layer, creation seemed to be responding. Not all at once, but deliberately, as though preparing the way for what was still to come. In the outskirts of Chicago, as a powerful winter storm gathered strength, weather radar systems worked continuously to track its movement across the region. But while reviewing the data, technicians noticed something they could not easily categorize. Forming within the heart of the storm was a distinct human-shaped figure, crowned with what appeared to be a radiant circlet, standing clearly against the surrounding mass of snow and cloud. The shape was immense, spanning several miles, yet its outline was sharply defined, captured not by imagination, but by radar itself. As the image appeared on screens, people on the ground sensed a sudden shift. The wind changed direction without warning, its low, resonant sound carrying across streets and frozen avenues. The noise did not resemble ordinary gusts or mechanical failure. Many described it as solemn, almost ceremonial, lasting less than a minute before fading back into the storm. Phones were raised. Recordings spread quickly as snow intensified and visibility dropped. Reaction across Chicago surged through social media within minutes. Live streams and first-hand accounts described the moment as unsettling and awe-filled, as if the storm briefly revealed something more than weather. Some said it felt like being observed. Others spoke of a presence silent, unmoving, outlined in light and shadow within the snowfall. Not thunder, not machinery, but something that felt deliberate. Within the framework of Scripture, the imagery carries familiar weight. In Revelation, crowned figures appear as messengers and rulers, not emerging from calm skies, but often amid upheaval and judgment. In Daniel and Isaiah, radiant beings are described clothed in light, appearing at moments of transition, when nations are weighed and times begin to shift. Seen through that lens, the crowned figure over Chicago becomes more than a visual anomaly. It resembles a herald, a sign that arrives not to explain itself, but to mark a moment. In the Bible, such figures do not appear casually. They signal movement decisions being made beyond human sight. If the earth spoke through shaking ground, if fire and light marked the land elsewhere, then now the frozen sky over the Midwest has joined the sequence. The image over Chicago is not merely striking or terrifying. It is a reminder. Like the trumpet calls of ancient times, it seems to say that a boundary has been crossed. Times are changing, and the storm was not finished speaking. In Indiana, the storm shut a nation's artery. A massive winter system surged across the region, burying highways, rail lines, and distribution corridors beneath thick, wind-driven snowfall. Interstates that once carried food, fuel, and freight across the country fell silent. Tractor-trailers jackknifed and stalled, frozen in place. Trains slowed, then stopped. Airports grounded flights, stranding travelers, and halting the steady flow that keeps distant cities connected. Whiteout conditions erased familiar landmarks. Winds howled across open plains, piling snow into walls that swallowed vehicles and closed rural roads. Temperatures plunged, turning exposure into a threat within minutes. Emergency crews worked around the clock, battling exhaustion and limited visibility as they tried to reopen routes that kept sealing shut behind them. Communities felt the impact almost immediately. Deliveries were delayed. Shelves thinned. Power outages left homes dark and cold as ice-laden lines sagged and failed. For those living along the storm's path, the danger was not abstract. It was measured in hours without heat, in roads that could not be reached, in help that could not arrive. What unfolded in Indiana revealed yet another dimension of the same pattern. When the atmosphere locks down movement, whether through water, mud, or snow, the systems built to sustain modern life stall with it. The storm did not need to destroy cities to disrupt the nation. It only had to stop the flow. The Bible speaks of a time when great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences would be joined by fearful events and great signs from heaven. Luke 21:11. A single winter storm is not the fulfillment of that prophecy, but it does pull back the curtain on how quickly movement can stop.
We do begin tonight here with the treacherous driving. Major multi-vehicle pileups across several states tonight.
I didn't clock out.
This is almost halfway up the door.
Tonight's headline news follows a series of unusual events unfolding across the United States. In Washington state, relentless rainfall pushed rivers beyond their limits, flooding streets and trapping residents who had gone out for routine errands. At the same time, across the Midwest, winter tightened its grip with crushing snowfall and extreme cold, Farther south, in Florida, without storms or seismic shocks, the ground beneath calm coastal waters gave way. And then, in Colorado, something even harder to explain emerged. Hikers and climbers reported the land itself rising and settling in a slow, rhythmic motion. These events are not seasonal anomalies, occurring months apart. They are appearing together. The question is no longer just what is happening, but why it is happening now. Like, share, and stay with us as we explore what may come next now. As winter tightened its grip elsewhere, western Washington was suddenly underwater, not slowly, not over days, but within hours. A powerful rain system stalled over the region, dumping relentless rain across Seattle, Tacoma, and surrounding suburbs. Drainage systems failed quickly. Streets turned into fast-moving channels. Water surged past curbs, swallowed parking lots, and climbed halfway up parked vehicles. In commercial districts, shoppers who had gone out for early year sales found themselves stranded, stores closing abruptly as water rose, buses suspended, roads cut off. Some stood in shopping centers watching water creep across asphalt, realizing they couldn't get home. This region is familiar with rain. It is built around it. Rain is expected, planned for, absorbed into daily life. But this was different. The volume overwhelmed everything at once, as if the ground itself could no longer take in what was falling from above. Many people had started the day expecting ordinary routines, errands, post-holiday returns, quiet afternoons. Instead, they found intersections submerged, vehicles stalled, power flickering, and emergency alerts sounding faster than anyone could respond. In some neighborhoods, first responders could only wait as water continued to rise, cutting off access entirely. What unsettled residents most was not just the damage, but the disorientation. Washington isn't supposed to flood like this. Rain belongs here, but not this kind, not this fast, not everywhere at once. Familiar streets disappeared. Normal reference points vanished. Confidence eroded in a matter of hours. Moments like this strip away assumptions quickly. When even regions built for rain are overwhelmed overnight, the sense of control fades. Systems people trust, forecast models, infrastructure, planning, suddenly feel thin. In the Old Testament, floods are often described not merely as weather, but as waters crossing boundaries. Genesis records, "All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened." Genesis 7:11. The image is not gradual overflow, but simultaneous release from above and below. The prophet Amos speaks of land reacting under pressure. "Shall not the land tremble for this, and all of it rise like the Nile?" Amos 8:8. Water moves where it should not, reshaping what people assumed was stable. And Ecclesiastes reflects the confusion that follows such moments. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. When limits are reached, release is unavoidable. As waters in Washington slowly receded, they left behind soaked storefronts, damaged homes, abandoned cars, and shaken people. Streets coated in mud, shopping bags left floating where sidewalks used to be, and a growing sense that this flood wasn't just another weather event to forget. Because when water replaces roads in places designed to withstand rain, it raises a deeper question. If this happened without warning, what else might follow? And if boundaries can fail this quickly, how many more are already under strain? Stay with us, because this is only the beginning. What comes next may reveal why extremes keep arriving back to back, and why so many are beginning to sense that something deeper is unfolding. Across the Midwest, winter arrived with a weight few were prepared for. In South Dakota, snowfall accumulated faster than crews could respond. Drifts rose past car hoods. Front doors disappeared behind walls of white. Entire neighborhoods lost their shape, reduced to faint outlines beneath an unbroken sheet of snow. These are places that know winter well. They budget for it. They brace for it. Yet this time, even experience failed. Farther southeast, in northern Iowa, temperatures plunged overnight, forcing families to make choices that went beyond convenience. In rural areas, people bundled dogs into garages and basements, stringing extension cords for space heaters to keep them alive. Farmers carried newborn calves and lambs by hand into barns, wrapping them in blankets meant for children. In those hours, protecting livestock was not routine work. It was an act of resolve against a cold that showed no mercy. What unsettled people most was not just the severity, but the shared timing. Different states, different systems, halted at once. Places built for winter faltered, and places merely accustomed to it were stretched thin. The quiet breakdown of normal life exposed how fragile everyday certainty can be. In moments like this, many recall words written long before modern forecasts or infrastructure. In the Old Testament, extreme cold is not portrayed as random. It is described as something released, measured, and allowed for a time. The book of Job records, "By the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen fast." Job 37-10. The image is not chaos, but command creation, responding to restraint. The Psalms echo the same authority over winter's force. He gives snow like wool. He scatters frost like ashes. He hurls down his ice like crumbs. Who can stand before his cold? Psalm 147-16:17. The question is not whether people are strong enough, but whether anything can resist when cold is permitted to settle. As families guarded their animals, layered their homes, and waited for roads to reopen, when even regions built for winter are pushed to their limits, it challenges the belief that preparation alone guarantees stability. The question that lingered was not how much snow had fallen, but what it meant when cold refuses to loosen its grip. If this could happen so suddenly, across so much of the Midwest, what else might arrive before things have time to reset? Stay with us. This is not an isolated moment. Each event seems to press closer to the next, and together they are beginning to tell a larger story. Before we continue, please give us a like and subscribe to receive notifications about our upcoming video. Off the coast of Florida, something deeply unsettling is unfolding beneath waters that still appear calm to the eye. Sections of the seafloor have begun collapsing without hurricanes, without violent waves, and without seismic warnings. From the surface, the ocean looks unchanged. Below it, sand and stone are slipping into hollow spaces that have been quietly forming over many years. As a result, authorities have closed portions of the coastline as beaches narrow and the ground beneath continues to weaken. Longtime residents say the change did not begin suddenly. People who have lived near these beaches for decades recall how the shoreline once stretched farther out, how there used to be more sand between the water and the dunes. "Every year there's less of it," one local said. "You don't notice it day to day, but when you look back 10, 20 years, the beach isn't where it used to be. What once felt solid and enduring has been thinning slowly, grain by grain." Geologists explain that Florida rests on limestone, a porous rock that dissolves gradually as water moves through it. Over time, this creates underground cavities and empty chambers. When water pressure shifts or currents change, the surface above can suddenly give way. What troubles experts is not that collapse is possible. It is that the process is invisible until the moment it happens. The Old Testament often uses foundations and sand as images of stability tested over time. The psalmist writes, "They sank down like lead in the mighty waters." Exodus 15:10, describing a collapse that comes not with warning, but with inevitability once support is lost. In Job, the earth itself is described as resting on unseen supports. He shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. Job 9-6. What appears firm depends entirely on what lies beneath. The prophets also warn of ground giving way quietly. Isaiah speaks of land failing under accumulated weight. The earth staggers like a drunkard, for its transgression lies heavy upon it. Isaiah 24-20. The image is not sudden violence, but slow imbalance finally exposed. What makes this moment so serious is the contrast between appearance and reality. Above the waterline, the sea looks peaceful. Beachgoers still walk familiar paths. Below, the foundation is breaking apart. The concern is not simply that land can collapse, but that it is doing so silently, while everything above continues as if nothing has changed. When the ground beneath the ocean begins to give way, attention inevitably turns inland, because what is happening offshore suggests that the land itself, long trusted, long inhabited, may already be under strain, even if it has not yet begun to show it. In Colorado, hikers, climbers, and residents living near the foothills began describing a phenomenon they struggled to put into words. The mountains were not cracking or collapsing, they were not shaking violently. Instead, the ground appeared to rise and settle in a slow, repeating motion, steady, measured, almost rhythmic. Those who witnessed it said it felt as if the land itself was inhaling and exhaling. What made the reports more difficult to dismiss was their consistency. Climbers on different trails, at different elevations, shared nearly identical observations online and with local officials. Videos taken miles apart showed the same subtle lift, followed by a gentle release. One experienced mountaineer remarked, "I've climbed these routes for over 20 years. The mountain didn't slide. It didn't break. It moved like it was adjusting itself." Equally unsettling was what did not accompany the movement. There were no earthquakes recorded, no volcanic alerts, no tremors detected by seismic instruments, nothing that normally explains motion at that scale. Geologists reviewed available data and suggested possibilities: deep pressure, redistribution, groundwater shifts, or slow crustal adjustment. Yet, even they acknowledged the irregularity. The motion was too smooth, too synchronized, and too quiet to fit familiar patterns. In the Old Testament, mountains are repeatedly portrayed as symbols of permanence, what humans assume will never move. Yet Scripture also records moments when mountains respond to a greater authority. The mountains tremble before him, and the hills melt. Nahum 1-5. The language is not of collapse, but of reaction creation responding to presence rather than force. The psalmist echoes this image. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like lambs. Psalm 114-4, describing movement that is neither destructive nor chaotic, but purposeful. And the prophet Habakkuk writes, "He stood and measured the earth. He looked and shook the nations. Then the eternal mountains were scattered." Habakkuk 3-6. Measurement comes before change. Awareness before outcome. What people are witnessing in Colorado does not resemble destruction. It resembles preparation. Not a breaking apart, but a loosening subtle, restrained, deliberate. When even the most immovable parts of the landscape refuse to remain completely still, it challenges the assumption that everything beneath us is as settled as it appears. If mountains long regarded as symbols of endurance and permanence can shift quietly without warning, Scripture suggests it is not random. It is a signal, and it leaves behind a question difficult to ignore. What kind of season are we living in, when even the land that defines stability no longer rests? As the mountains inland show signs of quiet movement, attention turns once more toward the coast, where change has already begun beneath the water. Off the coast of Florida, sections of the seabed are giving way in silence. Scientists warn that when the ocean floor drops or slides suddenly, it displaces large volumes of water. This shift can generate fast, forceful surges, even without storms, strong winds, or seismic shaking. From shore, the sea may appear unchanged until it behaves in ways no one anticipates. What has added urgency to these warnings are reports coming from below the surface. Multiple diving groups, operating along different stretches of Florida's coast, have shared nearly identical observations. The seafloor looks emptier. Creatures that once filled reefs and sandy bottoms, small fish, crustaceans, and bottom dwellers, are noticeably fewer. One experienced diver said, "We used to see life everywhere down there. Now there are long stretches where it's just quiet. It feels like something has already moved on." The reports come from separate teams, weeks apart, yet describe the same thinning presence. These waves, experts explain, are not the towering tsunamis people usually imagine. They are smaller, faster surges caused by collapse below rather than shock above. Because they are not triggered by earthquakes, there are no sirens, no advance alerts, and no obvious signs. Coastlines that look calm can be caught completely off guard. Oceanographers note that the sea often reacts slowly at first. When its foundation weakens, the surface may remain smooth for a time, but water cannot ignore instability below forever. As pressure shifts and voids expand, movement becomes inevitable. This is what makes the danger so difficult to detect. It does not announce itself. It gathers quietly, waiting. In the Old Testament, the sea is portrayed as responsive, not random. When its foundations are disturbed, it reacts. The psalmist writes, "The waters saw you, O God. The depths trembled." Psalm 77-16. The trembling begins below, unseen. Job describes the same hidden instability. He shakes the earth out of its place, and its pillars tremble. Job 9-6. Reminding that what holds land and sea together is not as immovable as it seems. The prophets also speak of the sea responding to unseen change. "The floods have lifted up, O Lord. The floods have lifted up their voice." Psalm 93-3. The lifting comes after pressure builds, not before. The ocean does not always rise immediately. Sometimes it waits. But once its foundation has begun to fail, Scripture suggests that change is only a matter of time. If the seafloor off Florida is already giving way, and if life beneath it is quietly thinning, the question may no longer be if the water will respond, but when. And when it does, the calm seen from shore may offer no warning at all. As scientists continue to investigate what is unfolding beneath Florida's coastline, a deeper and more unsettling revelation has begun to emerge. Beneath layers of sand, limestone, and seawater lies an extensive network of underground caverns, far broader and deeper than earlier surveys had suggested. This hidden landscape was not formed recently. It was shaped slowly, over thousands of years, sealed beneath the surface, while life continued above it, unaware. What makes the discovery especially striking is its location. Portions of this cavern system lie surprisingly close to protected land, within reach of areas long monitored for environmental and geological change, not far from a national park that has been mapped and studied for decades. And yet, Despite its proximity, the underground network remained undiscovered until now. It was not revealed by exploration or new technology. It surfaced only because the ground above it began to fail. These caverns were never meant to be exposed. They are not appearing through careful excavation or intentional descent. They are being uncovered by collapse. As ceilings thin and support gives way, the boundary between the visible world and the hidden one erodes. What was sealed is now open, not by design, but by necessity. Geologists explain that these chambers have always been there, silently bearing the weight of land and water above them. Over time, erosion and shifting pressure weakened their structure. When the balance finally changed, exposure followed. The result is more than sinkholes or subsidence. It is revelation proof that what lies beneath the surface is far more extensive and far more fragile than previously assumed. In the Old Testament, hidden realms are revealed only at a point